Hi, and welcome to the Selling in the Motor Trade podcast in association with CarWow, the online car-changing destination. Together, we share tips and ideas on how to sell more cars, improve your service department, and generally put more profit into your department, dealership, or dealer group. I'm your host, Simon Bowkett, or some of you might already know me as Skippy. Firstly, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Selling in the Motor Trade. Today, I'm joined with Stuart Wallbanks. Now, Stuart and I know each other for a long time, and I think he is one of the best trainers in the automotive industry. So, Stuart, welcome along.
Hi, Simon. Thank you. That's a very complimentary introduction.
Well, I mean it, actually. Otherwise, you wouldn't be working for Simco Training. So I'm going to have to say that. So, Stuart, for people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about your background. How do you get started in the motor trade?
I think like a lot of people I fell into it, really. It wasn't a career choice. I was in my late teens. I was a window cleaner. I lived by myself, just kind of trying to make ends meet. So I didn't have a lot of money. And my little Mark II Fiesta, it's a little A plate, I remember it fondly, wouldn't start one morning, and the engine block had frozen. There hadn't been enough coolant in it, and the car was a write-off, and I couldn't really afford to replace it without selling the window cleaning round. And I had this bright idea that maybe I could get a job that kept me indoors and provided me with a car. But in my late teens, who's going to give me a nice new car to drive around?
Yeah.
And then the light bulb hit. Maybe if I sold cars, I'd get a company car.
So you're what, 18, 19 at this point, you said?
Yeah, 19, just about to turn 20.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied at a dealership that's not there anymore called Platts Garage in Longton, Stoke-on-Trent. They were originally Fiat and Alfa Romeo. And I started. And I got I was very lucky, actually, because I started with Alfa Romeo. So I was lucky enough to drive a 156. And then a 147, which back then was quite the car.
But also now, actually, as an 18, 19-year-old, compared to window cleaning, I tell you what, that makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So yeah, crikey, that's giving my age away, but more than 2.5 decades ago. And started in sales, did a little bit of fleet sales.
Okay.
And then after a few years, I moved to Reg Vardy, which for me, in terms of career, was a great move because Vardy's, I'm sure many of the listeners remember or know of Reg Vardy, but remember Reg Vardy of old, a huge dealer group predominantly up north. And they trained you really well. They really invested well in their staff, which paid dividends really for the rest of my career. And I started then as a fleet manager for many years before I went back into retail.
It's amazing how many people have been through Reg Vardy's and still talk about what they learned back then. And even on this podcast, the amount of people that come through that Reg Vardy regime, they really did punch above their weight at the time, didn't they?
Do you know what? PLCs, you hear mixed reports. A lot of PLCs we work with, do a great job of looking after the staff, out of automotive and automotive. Some not so well, but Vardy's always had a great reputation. And when I speak to people my age or our age, that they reflect fondly of Vardy's. The 9-grid square, the little credit card that we used to carry. Your listeners that work for Vardy's will remember that well. And you know what? A lot of those phrases, if I could, would you please tell me now, all of that stuff is still widely used today.
Yeah, it is. It is. Paul Cummings, I think, did a lot of training there, and Paul Cummings definitely come up with that. Great trainer. I spoke with Paul at the Australian Automotive Dealers Association a couple of times now at their conference there, and it's a great educator in the motor trade. So this really separates the true motor traders, though. Do you remember the first car that you sold?
Do you know what? I was thinking about this. I remember the favourite sale I ever sort of took a customer through, and that was one of my earliest sales. Well, no, I can't remember the very first car, but I certainly remember one of the very first.
Go on. What happened?
A couple came in who happened to live in a small market town where I live, sort of a half-hour drive away from the dealership, and were looking for an Alfa Romeo. And they came in at around about 9:30 in the morning, and they were still with me at 6 o'clock in the evening. Now, some of that could have been my inability to close, but it was more than the fact that they knew they wanted a 156, They were just really torn on spec, because we're going back to sort of pre-internet, just about. So they'd gone through the brochures, we'd gone through the color chart on the wall, we kind of pulled out the different examples of leather. So they just wanted some advice, and they took many, many hours to spec what ultimately was my dream car. It was beautiful, red leather, dark grey metallic. It was a Veloce 2, so it was the top of the range. It was the 140 brake diesel, which back then 140 brake in a diesel was really impressive.
Yep.
A 5-cylinder engine, so it sounded great, went well. What was really lovely about them, actually, it was such a good experience for all of us. As a thank you, they bought me tickets to the RAC rally, as it used to be called back in the day, and invited me and my wife round for dinner as a thank you. So I must have done a good job.
Yeah, we always say there's 3 sales in any sale. Sell yourself first, the product second, and then the deal and the numbers. You've clearly sold yourself well there all day, just to be invited around. And clearly they knew you were into cars at that stage. Clearly to give you tickets to the RAC rally, they knew that. And you, by the way, people who don't know Stuart, he is a car nut. I got to say, within Simcoe Training, he is one of our biggest car nuts. I got to say, he absolutely still loves them. To this day, you still love cars, don't you?
Cars and bikes, yeah. I've had my bike license for 25 years. I still ride. Just spent a long time on the Isle of Man. So as a biker, that's a bit of a dream. Literally 2,000 miles around the TT circuit over a couple of summers. It's been quite good.
So listen, when you're in the industry, you're selling cars, or maybe you're a manager. Is there anyone who stood out as a big influencer on your career? Was there anyone that was almost a mentor towards you in those early days?
Honestly, the first dealership I worked for, there was no training, and we speak about this for delegates. My first day was there's the diary. Was it Sewell's diary?
Yeah, a Seals
There's
diary.
the diary. Yeah. There's a phone. If you can sell me 5 or 6 in your first month, that would be brilliant. Crack on. And that literally was my induction. And you sort of learned on the job, which made the transition to Vardy's really interesting, because their approach was completely different. They really wanted to develop you and help you to be the best that you could be. And you mentioned Paul Cummings, actually, and he was the first person that I ever spent time with that really talked about mindset. Mm. And he had this idea which seemed a little bit odd to me, and it was this idea of writing a letter to yourself telling you what you wanted to achieve. And he actually asked, does anyone in the audience, so this was a management training session, all the managers within Vardy's, we all went up to head office. So it was a couple of thousand of us. That sounds too many, but it was a very large number. And I remember the gentleman was a guy called Nick Page, who was one of the regional directors for Vardy's. He was my regional director back in the day, and he put his hand up, and he had clearly done training before and followed through, and he'd written a small letter to himself telling him he was great at what he did. This is what he was going to achieve. I remember that Paul Cummings rewarded him with a trip out to his ranch over in the States, which kind of really set the tone that Nick Page was someone I looked up to. He was a regional director, clearly operating at high level. And this idea of mindset and a can-do attitude, not just because he won a trip to the States, but clearly that was working for him. So, kind of thinking about how I set myself up for the day, that was new to me back then.
Yeah, okay. So you're in the management side of it, and I'm always interested. Why does someone like you and I, you've got a great job, you're a manager working for a great company. Why do you decide, you know what, I don't want to be selling, I don't want to be a manager in this department anymore. I want to go and teach people how to do it. What's your motivation to get into the training side of it?
I was very fortunate to fall into it. It was never something I'd considered. I had an interesting upbringing with my nan and granddad. They were very religious, which I'd seen through up to that point in my life, and we were taught in public speaking. But I'd never considered to use that in any sort of career path. And my then partner was a trainer, and suggested that, do you know what, you've got a real good knowledge in the motor trade, you're quite passionate about it, you have a history and a skill in public speaking. On paper, at least, you'd make a good trainer. Do you fancy giving it a go? And naturally, my reaction was, because I was doing retail at the time, was, well, you do get your Saturdays and Sundays off, right? So I've got nothing to lose. And yeah, just sort of threw myself into the deep end.
So listen, you've seen lots of trainers over your time, okay? Paul Cummings, you mentioned there before. Your partner at the time was a trainer, from what I understand. What separates the good, the bad, and the ugly? From your point of view, what makes a great trainer?
For me personally, credibility. So you need to have total confidence in what you're sharing works. For me, you needed to have practiced it. Explaining to someone what they should do is completely different to actually doing it for yourself and realizing it works. So credibility, that you would never ask anyone to do or train anyone to do something that you couldn't do yourself. Now, I've been fortunate. I've worked with many exceptional trainers over the many, many years I've been doing this, from all different backgrounds. And the vast majority, as I say, are really good trainers. You do still come across the ones that I know you talk about, those that those that can do, those that can't teach, sort of mentality. But I think credibility and the ability to build rapport, because when we have a room of 10, 15 delegates in front of us, we've got a whole mixed bag there of people in terms of skill set, background, what they believe works for them. So being able to share ideas that everyone in the room can buy into, and at least encourage them or convince them to see if it could work for them before they make the decision that it wouldn't. I think the ability to build that level of rapport and the credibility are the differentiators.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. And I want to get your view now. We're seeing lots of new people coming in the motor trade, and dare I say, the younger. It tends to be the younger men. Okay, and I'm sure ladies might do this as well, but they see the Jordan Belforts, the Wolf of Wall Street, and they go, "Oh, that's where I want to be. It's a great movie. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am." They see the, dare I say it, some of the these online gurus. Okay, that you're going to be driving a Ferrari next week. You're going to make millions there. I just want to get your views on some of those. Is that approach right in the motor trade in 2025?
That's a tough question to answer. So an element of that, sure, that level of confidence and self-belief will carry you a long way. I think the film you've mentioned is fantastic. I'm not so sure that some of the people that are portrayed as heroes actually are. But I think back to, so I started to train, would have been about 15 years ago. And back then, it was all about closing. It was all about sell me a pen, as
Yes,
portrays. And I guess my speciality back then was the ability to close. So the language to use, different types of closing. But over the years, and as long as maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, that sort of transition now into it's all about the customer. And we know that if you look after a customer and really make them feel special, thank them for their inquiry, thank them for their visit, make sure that you are doing everything that you can do to help them make an informed choice. If you look after the customer from experience, everything else tends to look after itself. So I think there's a combination. I think that the customer focus that we have, first and foremost, is really important. We've got to make sure that that customer becomes an advocate of our business, that they wouldn't just buy a car from us again, but they would recommend us to their friends and family. I think if we've achieved that, we've clearly done a good job. Behind that, go back to when I was new, all those years ago. I'd had no training, and I got by. I wasn't the best salesperson, but I did a good job, and that was the ability to build rapport. I just get on with people. I just got on with people. They felt that they could trust me. They could trust me. I followed through on my promises. And because of that, I sold a number of cars. I also worked with people who weren't particularly great at building rapport. They weren't necessarily nice people. I certainly wouldn't have encouraged my grandmother to buy a car of them. Yet because they followed a set of rules, if you like, they used certain words and phrases at certain times, they did really well. And then what I found is the real high achievers, those that did excellent, your top sort of 5%, combined the two. They've got all the right words and phrases to use at the right time while having the ability to be transparent, to be truthful, to build rapport. There's a saying, isn't there, that people buy from people they like.
Mm.
Not sure that's strictly true. I think people buy from people they trust. I might
Yeah.
not like you, Simon, but if I truly believe that you're acting in my best interests, we're probably going to have a deal, aren't we?
Yeah.
Um, but if I trust you and I like you, then that's kind of the holy grail, I think, in my world. So, in answer to your question, I think there needs to be that combination. First and foremost, it's customer first, making sure that they feel that they're having the best possible experience, while the sales executive is using the techniques, the process, the words and phrases that we know work.
Yeah, I think you summed up perfectly for me, and I just get a little bit worried sometimes where you see the great movie, by the way, Wolf of Wall Street, and I'm sure there's lots of good techniques, but again, we see this is 2025. Back when he was doing it, they didn't actually have the internet. If you
Yeah,
upset someone, okay, it's going to be hard for them to tell 250 million people. You upset someone in Wexford Island, okay, very quickly, they're going to tell everyone in that town, hey, don't be going buying from Boland's because they really upset me.
yeah,
Also, back then, again, I mean, the Wolf of Wall Street, they were ripping people off. He went to jail, and great movie. But you know, let's look after people now. Anyone can sell one car. We want to sell them their second, their third car, their family and friends' cars. And it's that great service. Now, having said that, sales techniques work. I don't want to be the other side of it and build all the rapport and they love you so much, but then they go and buy from someone else who just says, do you want it? Shall
yeah.
we secure that for you?
Mm.
So I really do believe that sales process does work. But
You're right. We were talking before we started the podcast about an old colleague of mine, Richard.
Mm.
And if I can share that example because I think it
Yeah.
sums it up really really well. I'd never so Rich was one of the top salespeople, and he was one of those people that absolutely had the technique, but also was a genuinely nice guy. People just warmed to him.
Yeah.
And I'd never really made it my business to watch him or listen to him. He was just a great salesperson that I sort of I wanted to emulate. But I did notice we were working for Stoke Citron at the time, Reg Vardy, that when it came to closing with all his customers, he'd always put his hand out over the desk and ask for their business. So that's just £179 a month. Please, may I have your business today? And I heard him do it once, and I thought, God, that's really direct. I find that a little bit blunt. That surely a lot of people are going to be put off by a salesperson that puts their hand out, expecting you to shake it in return, and says, "Please, may I have your business?" And I asked him after that particular set. I said, "Rich, that closing technique that you used on that couple, I've got to say, it feels a little bit direct. I'm not sure that's as effective as maybe you think it is." And he said, "Stewie, I've just spent 2 hours with them." I said, yeah. I said, actually, no, you have, because I've kind of been watching and listening. He said, no, don't get me wrong. That's not an issue. He said, but for 2 hours, I have answered all of their questions. I've given them as much help and advice as I possibly could. I didn't just take them on one, but I took them on 2 test drives to make sure that the car was absolutely the right for them. He said, we work on sort of a self-employed basis, don't we? Now, by that, we were paid a very low basic back then. It was around about £8,000 from memory. It might have been a touch more, but certainly wasn't enough to live on. And true commission based. He said, so for 2 hours, I've given my time to that couple to help them buy the car that's right for them based on the information that they've given me. And ultimately, in those 2 hours, other people have come and gone that I know I could have sold a car to. He pointed to one of the sales execs who was closing a deal that wasn't a particularly strong sales exec at the time. And Rich pointed to that individual and said, well, look, he's just selling a car. If I'd got into those customers first, I definitely would have sold them a car and made more money. I said, what's your point? He said, my point's really simple. For 2 hours, I've done the very best job that I can possibly do. Don't you think I deserve something in return? Don't you think I deserve their business? I said, well, when you put it like that, absolutely. He said, so there you go. I've earned the right to ask them for the business. And that's what I'll do with every customer. And all the way through my career, Rich was always one of the top salespeople.
But I love what you said there. He earned the right to ask for the business there. So many times you get salespeople, they'll see Rich do that. They'll try it where they haven't earned the right. They haven't gone on that demonstration drive. They haven't qualified properly. They haven't trial closed effectively there. And then they do it and think, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. No. He earned the right to get away with that.
Yeah, and he did. It was interesting. I remember the conversation quite vividly. I said, "You just said, please, may I have your business?" And he said, "No, no, no, I didn't." I said, "Please, may I have your business?" Okay, yeah, that makes a difference. But you're right. Rich followed process. A thorough part exchange appraisal, a great sort of demonstration drive. All the great things that we know and train. And you're right. He'd earned the right to get something in return for his efforts.
Yeah. Listen, people like you and I, we spend our life in dealerships, and we often say that we do a lot of R&D. Now, a lot of people call R&D research and development. We tend to call it rob and duplicate. If there's a good idea there, we go and rob it and duplicate it, and this is a good idea. You know that we spend more money on training our consultants than what a lot of dealers do. We go out to NADA conferences where we're always training and trying to learn as much as we can. So consequently, you go into lots of dealerships. Okay, you see the good and the great dealerships.
Mm.
In your mind, what separates the good from the great? What do the great do?
That's a really good question. It's odd. We talk about this sixth sense, don't we? That I don't know if there's a name for it, but you walk into a
Gut
dealership.
feel. You do.
Yeah,
You get that gut feel.
you do, don't you? You kind of walk in and you know what that morning meeting was like. Let's say that, but you kind of know what the mentality of that dealership is. And without doubt, the best performing dealerships tend to be where the staff, the sales execs, those in after sales are working as a team. When you have a business that's full of individuals, the sort that would super glue your phone to the desk so you couldn't answer it and tie your laces together, that sort of thing. Well, there's always a bit of fun like that in a great dealership. I think those that have a team mentality. I'll give you an example. I was in a dealership down south, and the sales manager there had pretty much abolished the morning meeting. It was a very brief, let's just talk about, basically customer first. What have we got going on with our customers today? And he relied more heavily on a checkout meeting, which is something we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And what that did was it freed up a lot of time in the morning when the after sales department are at their busiest. I've always found it odd that 9 o'clock in the morning, we're in an office talking about the everyday stuff when there's a whole list of a whole queue of customers waiting to put their car in for service. And this particular sales manager encouraged that the sales executives at that time of the day would go and talk to the service customers and make them coffee and just chat to them. And you know what? It's that sort of dealership that makes the difference, where they are absolutely putting the customer first. And it's one business. There isn't this invisible wall between sales and after sales, like historically there's always been. It's all about looking after the customer. And we know from experience, when you're making a coffee for an after sale, for a service customer or someone who's waiting for parts, and you have a bit of a chat with them, how many times do you end up selling a car anyway?
Yeah, yeah. How often they say, "What's the car? 3.5-year-old car. I could sell that in a heartbeat." Okay, it just happens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It absolutely happens. Now, playing devil's advocate, more and more customers are starting their car buying journey online, digitally. We know that the research shows it's what's it up to 24 hours? I think someone told me the other day in a conference. Research people do before they walk in, phone in, or email a dealership. Even that figure there, I think it could be more than that. Now, I know some people don't. But because of people are starting there, people know more about the car than what we do sometimes. The sales process, the road to a sale, is it still relevant in 2025?
Yeah, 100%, as much as ever. And there's a reason that the sales process hasn't changed in thousands of years, let alone, 2 years or a decade or so. I think the difference is, go back to my days of selling at Alfa Romeo. Sure, back then, they had probably, I can't remember, visited Audi, Mercedes-Benz, Saab, as it was back in the day. That arguably was one of my biggest competitors, because a little bit of a niche brand was Saab.
Yep.
And they come in and gather all the brochures to go back home, to do some reading, to make some more informed choices, to narrow it down. So our job back then was to sell the car, because ultimately the internet wasn't there to do that for them. The fundamental change now is to simply find out what selling the customer has done to themselves.
Yeah.
That's something I picked up from you the very first time I listened to you deliver the road to a sale. And I thought that just hits the nail on the head. Arguably the customer's done my work for me.
Yeah.
All I've got to do is ask So why that particular car? Why that particular spec? Why was that important to you? And ultimately, the customer isn't just telling you what their hotspots are, but they're kind of reselling the car to themselves. So in some ways, I think our job's got a little bit easier. Now, some sales execs might disagree with me there, but looking at it positively, I think an informed customer, an awful lot of our job's been done.
Yeah, so true, because it's that feature dumping still happens. Now, don't take it the wrong way. Manufacturers' training courses, and we do them, but so much of it, they focus on the car. Because let's be honest, the salespeople they need to know about the EV technology, and they need to know this new stuff that's coming along. The technology in modern car, there's so much on it, and sometimes we find that good old-fashioned sales process is just not happening. And again, the road to sale, yes, we still believe in that. It might be old hat, you might call it different things. Okay. However, we do need to find out what selling people have done for themselves before they get to us. And what's about that car put on your shopping list? And why specifically that feature there? And gently take it away from them. They will defend their reasons for wanting it. And of course, that's when they're selling it to themselves. But it still means we plug that into the process. Can you sell a car without a demonstration? Of course you can. We all have. I'd argue, why bother? Because isn't it so much easier to sell a car after we've raised the desire in that car?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm fortuitous that I've nearly always had a company car. Certainly in the last few years. So my latest buying experience was a new motorbike last year, and I'd already made my mind up. I thought that this particular bike, the one I ended up buying, was the one for me. And the dealer encouraged me to take it out for a test ride, and I don't think I'd done more than half a mile before I absolutely knew that was the bike I was going to be buying. Nothing will ever replace that. So you're right, people will start their journey online. In some cases, they'll finish that journey online, and we won't have the opportunity to interact with them very much. But as much as we can, let's get the customers in front of us. Let's get, bums on seats steals the deal. I'm not a big fan of all those old adages, but you know what? That's definitely one that still works. It's still relevant.
Yeah, that's so true. But also, we can't forget that buying a car is still an emotional decision for people. We need to tap into that emotional side of it. You told me a story about when Jacob, your first boy, was born, and you were celebrating is not the right word, but you wanted to buy yourself a nice watch, okay, to mark the occasion and something to pass on to Jacob. Can you just tell the listeners about that story and how you were wowed when you bought that watch?
It amazes me. You remember my stories better than I do. I haven't thought about this for years. So I don't have anything to hand down to the next generation. So when we found out that my wife was pregnant, for some reason I thought about the fact, you know what, it'd be really nice if I had something that I could pass down. And being in the motor trade, it's always been about the watch. I wore an Apple Watch. To me, that does everything I could possibly need. But many people that I know and I've trained, it's about, more often than not, the Rolex. Depending what level of management you're at, might be the Patek, but I'm certainly not at that level. So I thought, I'd really like to own a Rolex. Certainly not to wear every day, but to wear for special occasions. So when I hand it over to my son, it isn't just there's your dad's watch, but it's got what's the word for history? It's got provenance, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So I'd kind of made my mind up I was going to buy a Rolex, and I went into the Rolex dealer, and the lady that dealt with me to this day is probably one of the best sales persons I've ever had the pleasure of dealing with. And so she said, welcome to this particular jeweler. How can I help you? Thinking about buying a watch. She said, oh, great. What research have you done? So I'm thinking about buying a Rolex. So she took me up to the second floor, which was their Rolex boutique. And she said, Stuart, what other watches do you have in your collection? I don't have a collection of watches. I've got my Apple Watch. And we were sat down, and she lay back in a chair and smiled. She said, I'd be fascinated to know your story. I said, what do you mean? She said, I know when my customers come in and buy their first watch from me. Now, that's interesting. We can come back to that. She said, there's always a reason. There's always something that's happened that's made my customer think today's the day I'm going to start my collection. So I shared with her what we've just shared. My wife's pregnant. My little boy will be due in sort of 6 months or so. and I'm really thinking about investing in a watch that ultimately will be something to hand down to him. She said, "Oh, she said that's fantastic." She said, "And do you know what? I meet a lot of my clients for the first time when they're in exactly that same situation. Their partner's pregnant, and they're thinking about investing in their child's sort of what's the word?
It's not so much future, is it? But it's just something to pass down. It's
Yeah."
yeah.
But she said, "Stuart, if you don't mind me saying, you've really missed a bigger picture here." I said, "Really? What's that?" She said, "You've only thought about passing this down to your son or your daughter." She said, "But Stuart, this is a Rolex. This watch will last generation after generation after generation. So when you hand it down to Jacob, that'll be a magical moment. This will be, here's your dad's watch. But have you not thought about when Jacob hands it down to his firstborn, and then it'll be, this was your granddad's watch, and then the generation after that, this was your great granddad's watch." She said, "Stuart, today you're not just buying a watch, you're starting a legacy for your family." And honestly, I nearly fell back off my chair. I couldn't get my credit card out quick enough. It's not quite that simple with a Rolex, as you know. But,
Yes.
there was no doubt that, yeah, I've absolutely made the right decision. And what's more, I'm definitely going to get this lady to find the watch that I wanted to buy.
Yeah. Again, she's not selling a watch there, is she? She's absolutely selling. She's got the question. We would say, "What's about that car put on your shopping list?" She's
Yeah,
asked exactly the same thing, but in her words, is what we
yeah.
say all the time there. Find out what
And,
selling people have done to themselves before they get to us.
and there's no doubt when you analyze that, which, doing the job that I do, in the moment, I'm hearing the language that she's using. I can see she's got, either by complete fluke or with some great training, there's a great sales process in there. But I didn't feel like I was being processed. That experience to this day will always be, one of the best I will ever experience. But if I just go back to the language she used, when my clients buy their first watch off me, when my clients are beginning their collection, so she's already setting the seed that
Yeah.
I'll be going back to her to buy another watch and maybe another watch.
But
It's really clever.
but again, so clever. She's telling people that people do go back to her because she looks after them every single
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not like I sell them one. It's not the Jordan Belford wham bam, thank you, ma'am. On to
Yeah.
the next, is it? It's
Yeah.
completely different there.
And I think in that example is the perfect example of someone who is combining the two things I talked about earlier. Clearly got a great process. I don't think she's ever stumbled across that. If she has, she's been very lucky. But she owns a great process. She knows what questions to ask. She's using the correct language. But it felt completely genuine.
Yeah.
I felt like she had a real vested interest in my journey and why I was buying a watch. And again, when you combine those two things, the knowledge and the ability, along with the rapport building and the personality, I'm sure she's very successful.
It felt genuine, probably because it was genuine.
Yeah.
And that's the real key to it, I think. I think
Mm.
it is. So listen, let's move up a bit. Okay. Sales manager. Okay. Lots of people listen to this podcast that might just be stepping into their first role as a sales manager. Okay. And thinking, what do I do? What do I manage? Where do I start? Can I ask you, if you were starting in a business as a sales manager, what would you first focus on your first 90 days?
Ooh, um, to not answer that question directly, the first thing that came to mind from experience, my own experience, going back into the retail world and the management position, um, and therefore having real close experiences of people around me. When you move into management, don't don't lose the ability that you have. So those who go into sales management typically sold a lot of cars.
Hmm.
And you'd think, therefore, they will always have the ability to sell a lot of cars. But, we know through experience that management is quite different to life on
Yeah.
the shop floor, so to speak.
Yeah.
And in my training career, I've met many transaction managers, business managers, sales managers, heads of businesses who have totally lost the ability to second face, to sell a car. And I think my experience is some sales managers become fearful of second facing because they've been replaced as another great salesperson behind them doing the job that they used to do. And we know when we've been asked to go and second face and close a deal, people gather around like we've got these incredible sort of golden words to share. And because we are always put in that circumstance or that situation, we maintain our ability to second face and close a deal. But I'd say to any new sales manager, don't ever underestimate the importance of speaking with the customers, having the confidence to go and second face and close a deal to help your team out if necessary. And if you get to a point where you've been in a management position for many years and you know that you'd rather not second face because you don't want to lose face, just reach out. It doesn't, we can in confidence have a one-to-one, might only be an hour or two where we can help you. And the techniques that they once had will still be there. We just need to freshen them up.
I love what you said there. They don't second face because they don't want to lose face.
Yeah.
And we get that with trainers all the time. And something I know with you all the time, I get the phone calls that I remember one Peugeot dealership on the South Coast. Did you sell 2 cars on the day? I had a phone call from the dealer principal just raving about you, and there's a bottle of wine or 2 for you that I had to give you next time because of the cars that you sold.
You're right. Do you know what? Just for transparency, you're very close. It wasn't actually a sold car. No, that's not true. We were delivering prospecting training.
Okay.
To the sales guys, and there were half-day sessions, so the team was split into 2. And as we do, I said, what I'd like, please, is some data because I'm going to share with you best practice and then I'm going to demonstrate it. And by no means are we perfect. Like not every call that we make resonates with the customer. And sometimes we fluff the lines. We're not perfect.
But sure, I'm going to stop you. Sometimes doesn't work better when we fuck it up. I really think it does because salespeople think, hold on, if he got it wrong, I can do it. And by the way, I promise you. Oh, and the other thing, if I'm in your dealership and I'm doing some prospecting or following up a customer and speaking to a customer, you watch, the phone gets heavy for me because I get nervous.
Yeah.
Okay. I shouldn't admit that as a trainer, but I do. And you know what? Because we're human.
So here's what happened. They got me the data and I put my phone on loudspeaker, and these were customers who'd recently been in for a service, and we hadn't capitalized on the opportunity while they were within the business to have a conversation. But at least at this point, we were trying to, play catch up. Now, Simon, there's a lot of luck here. This doesn't normally happen. The very first call I made live in front of 7 or 8 delegates.
Waiting for you to fail sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always one.
Yeah.
Answered the phone, and I made an appointment for the very next day. And they did go on and sell that person a car, which is where you've got the car sale from. And exactly the same thing happened in the afternoon. I couldn't believe my luck. I did the training. I got the data. I was like, look, the luck I had this morning was incredible. The very first customer I spoke to, we had a really good conversation. They were really excited to come back down because, their car is exactly what we were looking for stock. And you know what? It could be a win-win because I've also got a car in mind that would be perfect for them. I said, there's no way I'm going to have that much luck again. And sure enough, the very first call I made, the customer answers. They appointed for later in the week, and the feedback was that both those customers did indeed show, and they sold a car, which is why the bottles of champagne were passed on to me as a thank you. But it just shows though it's knowing what to say, and just doing it, just picking up the phone, and it's a Jordan Belfort thing, isn't it? Just pick up the phone and dial. Simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, listen, this is the shameless plug for our first 90-day sales training program. So listeners are used to me using this all the time. Okay. But is there anything you learned in your first 90 days of selling cars that is as relevant today in 2025 as it was when you first started?
It goes back to that word for me: credibility, transparency, honesty. Never overpromise and underdeliver. I've been guilty of this. We've all been guilty of this. If we sense a sale, we get a little bit excited. We get a little bit carried away. We start to probably promise or offer a little bit more than what's actually feasible. So, slow down. Don't rush. I mean, that would be key. Certainly, if you're inexperienced, we tend to speed up as we get excited. We speed up if we think that we're sensing a sale. But stick to the process, stay calm, and make sure that everything that you're promising the customer, you absolutely can deliver on.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Absolutely love it. Listen, you still clearly have a passion for the motor trade. You've been a trainer, you've gone back into the retail world, you're back into training now. Going back and I love the idea that you were back for 18 months, was it? Um,
Yeah,
2 years
COVID
straight?
was as for many of us, and certainly the business owners listening will empathise with that. You know, that changed my life monumentally, and so the decade or more I'd been self-employed kind of very swiftly, well, in just the case of a couple of phone calls, came to an end, and it took a while to resurrect. You know, and you know, you've you lived through that yourself, and so through that time I went back into employment. And in that time, yes, I've just spent 18 months working for Van Marcel Jackson's on the Isle of Man. Great company to work for. Had a superb experience. Tough, very challenging. Just because it's a fairly affluent island doesn't mean for 1 second that it's without its challenges. But it was really good to have the opportunity to practice what I'd been preaching for a long time. And it reminded me, like, while I was there, a chap called Neil, who was instrumental ultimately in starting me off as a trainer. He was the person that gave me my first opportunity with PSA. He went back into a business as head of business. He turned 50. He got a bad back and decided that the miles that we do in the car up and down the country, he could no longer do. And he'd been in a dealer for several months. And I said to him, Neil, I'm fascinated to learn all the stuff that we train. Does it actually work? You know, right now, right here, right now. And his answer I experienced for myself on the Isle of Man, and it's absolutely correct. He said, Stuart, everything that you train absolutely works. The reality is, when you're in a business, ultimately numbers and profit kind of the most important thing, and now customer experience, which we've touched on. He said, so what I've learned is you can't do all of the things that you want to do all of the time. That is unrealistic. He said, but to have that sort of suite of words, phrases, ideas to cherry pick from means that, yeah, do you know what? I'm finding it that my team are being very successful doing what they can when they can. And I kind of thought about that a lot on the Isle of Man. There was a lot that I wanted to do that I couldn't because the customer didn't give me opportunity. They wouldn't allow me to steer them in a particular way. You know, we know we can prove that we should be doing the part exchange appraisal before we do a demonstration drive. That works. But sometimes your customer just won't allow you to do it. You know, they've got their own process, and and there are times we just have to flex. But doing as much as we can, having the knowledge and the confidence to do as much as we can when we can, pays dividends.
Yeah. And we always talk about understanding the psychology behind the techniques is more important than the actual words. Because if you use our words word for word, you might sound like a cheesy Australian, a cheesy Northerner, a Southerner, or whatever. But if you understand the ideas behind it, the psychology behind it, you don't have to use our cheesy words. You can use your own cheesy words. When the customer wants to just drive the car first, great. But if we understand that, we haven't had a chance to find out what they like most, what they would change about their car. If you know that I still need to be asking those questions beforehand, that's the important bit. So when you drive the car, you can sell the right car to the right customer at the right time. So I do believe we need to be customer centric is a great word that's been bandied around lots, but you still got to understand the psychology as to why this would be the way that we do it, the utopian way, the perfect way.
It's one of the things that for me has made our job even more interesting over the last 4 or 5 years is the psychology. You know, we've kind of moved on from this is what works, but we for ourselves, you know, Simon Sinek, why, you know, we've really looked at why people behave the way that they do. And I also find when you share that with our delegates, you know, this doesn't work because it worked for me, or it doesn't work because it worked for a mate of mine back in the day. Here's the psychological evidence why this is best practice. I find that's a really powerful learning tool. But it's kept my enjoyment of the job, because for us, we're always learning. It's that R&D, isn't it? We're always hearing new ideas, new ways of doing things. So it keeps us fresh.
Yeah, I think that's what we need to be, as fresh as we can, because the world is changing. However, people haven't. People are still people. I think that's the constant all the time there. Now, listen, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you could share just one tip one idea, one technique that either a sales manager, an after sales manager, a service advisor, or a salesperson could go back and put in place today, right now, and sell red or amber work, sell paint and fabric, sell a car, put more profit, or get a salesperson do what they should do? What one technique do you want to leave the listeners with?
You all put me on the spot for the third or fourth time. For me, one of the things that anyone for themselves or as a manager for their team can implement that will have the biggest effect is language. So this is something that was drummed into me many years ago. There's not good and bad. There's good and there's less good, or there's good and there's opportunity. And really raising negative language is really powerful. It's powerful when you're trying to develop your teams as a manager. It's really powerful with customers. I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Customer, because that's really negative. I'm afraid. People don't like to hear no. People like to hear solutions, don't they? They like to be told, have you considered it doing it this way, as opposed to, no, I can't do that. So just look at your language. How do you communicate with your teams, your customers? And we talk about this heavily in Road to a Sale. There's a reason that we use a lot of negative language. Our whole psyche, back in caveman days, the way that we survived was by being pessimistic. What's the worst possible thing that could happen? Because if we prepare for that, everything else should be okay, right? And through that, I'll just give you a quick example. This is one I share with people in training. My nan used to say things like, Stuart, get out of that tree, you'll fall and break your neck. Or Stuart, get away from the water, you'll fall in and drown. Stuart, get away from the road, a bus will hit you, a bus will run over you. I was never run over by a bus, I never drowned, and I never fell out of a tree. But that's probably because my grandmother put the fear of God into me that, the worst possible thing that could happen. And I do it with my boy. He's nearly turning 4. And because you don't want them to fall into danger, you sort of educate them that the worst thing is always around the corner. And through that, our attitude, our language tends to come from a negative, sort of pessimistic angle as opposed to a positive and can do. So just really look at that. Look at the words and phrases that you're using. Nothing's bad. Nothing's broken. We sell cars. We're not brain surgeons. There's going to be good and there's going to be less good. There's things that we've done brilliantly today, and tomorrow there's going to be opportunities.
I love that. On the first training course you sat on with me, you said, Skip, like the training course, but I got to tell you, you can't ask a customer, is there anything you don't like about your current car? Okay. And that's something I took on board from you many years ago. And you're right. Hey, is there anything to improve? Anything you change? Okay. If you say don't like, sorry, I'm cutting you off.
No, you're absolutely right. Is there what don't you like about your current car? Is one of those age-old. If you say to a delegate, "What's your top 10 questions to ask?" What don't you like about your current car? What the question is looking to achieve is brilliant. The challenge we're saying to a customer, "What don't you like about your car?" infers that they made a mistake buying that car in the first place. So we'd simply change that to, "There's anything you could change on your current car, what would it be?" "Wow, do you know what? I wish I had more space because we had another baby and blah blah blah." So, there's an example of using positive language.
Love it. Listen, Stuart, I've really enjoyed that. Okay, how do people get hold of you? What's the easiest way? LinkedIn. What's the easiest way to find you?
LinkedIn, absolutely. I think that works for all of us. Stuart.Wallbanks at simcotraining.co.uk. All of your listeners, I'm confident will have connected with you through LinkedIn, through Simco Training, so you'll find me there.
No problem. And again, reach out to Stuart. If you're one of those managers, say, give us some ideas on how to second face. Again, Stuart will speak to you on the phone. He'll talk to you and give you some ideas there. Stuart,
Lovely.
It was great to have you.
Thanks, Simon. I've enjoyed that. Thank you.
That just leaves me to say that all details of this episode and other episodes on the selling in the motor trade can be found on our website, simcotraining.co.uk. Go there to get a copy of our book, Words That Sell Cars. Go there to sign up to a free trial of our Sales Fitness online sales training program. Easiest way to get hold of me is Simon Bowkett through LinkedIn. Thank you.